Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West, and it's time to get week 94 of the TTT underway with another Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, after spending Series 11 in Rohan, we've been spending Series 12 in Gondor, beginning with Anorion. We spent a couple of weeks looking more closely at the Beacon Hills of Gondor, before strolling through the Druidon Forest and then making our way through Stonewain Valley. Now, last week, we looked at the Rammas Echor, and today, well, it's time to look at the fields of the Pelennor and see if we have time to get to the gate of Minas Tirith. Last week, Gandalf offered a little wisdom to Ingolde at the north gate of the Rammas Echor, saying that they were overlate in repairing the wall of the Pelennor, advising them to leave your trowels and sharpen your swords. Good advice. And a reminder that the wall that we looked at last week, the Rammas Echor, is the outwall built to protect not just the city of Minas Tirith, but the lands within, the fields of the Pelennor. After the passage I read last week about the Rammas, we get a very brief but beautiful description of the lands within the Rammas. The townlands were rich, with wide tilth and many orchards, and homesteads there were with oast and garner, fold and byre, and many rills rippling through the green from the highlands down to Anduin. Yet the herdsmen and husbandmen that dwelt there were not many, and the most part of the people of Gondor lived in the seven circles of the city. Now, we got a bit more in the passage about the Rammas, that it enclosed in its fence the fields of the Pelennor, fair and fertile townlands on the long slopes and terraces falling to the deep levels of the Anduin. So before we look any further at the Pelennor itself, we need to look at the word. And no, this isn't suddenly becoming a Word Nerd Wednesday. It's that looking at the word answers the question of which came first, the Rammas or the Pelennor. I mean, obviously the lands existed long before the Rammas was built, and the lands were rich given the geography. But they would not have been called the Pelennor Fields until after the Rammas was built. After all, the name Pelennor translates to fenced, encircled land in Sindarin. The Sindarin root pel, meaning fence, border, edge, go round in circle. We see that in the name of the mountains of Aman, the Pelori, mountain wall or fencing heights, and in its lenited form in Efelduath, mountains of shadow, but literally fence of shadow. Now, the Nor ending is a lenited form of Dor, land, as in Gondor, Doriath. So it's literally the fenced lands, a name that it would have gained only after the Rammas Echor was built. Now, with that said, let's take a look at the region itself. Given what we learned last week about the dimensions of the Rammas Echor, at least 30 miles long, but defining roughly 3/4 of a circle, and knowing that the diameter was at least 12 miles, that's the distance from Minas Tirith to the furthest point of the wall, the area encompassed by the Rammas is very roughly 80,000 acres, or 127 square miles. For the sake of visualization, that's about the size of Portland, Oregon, or a tiny bit smaller than the Isle of Wight. We're talking huge tracts of land. And they're wonderfully rich farmlands, complete with words you probably don't recognize, so let's chat about those. The lands had wide tilth, and the homesteads had oast and garner, fold and byre. Tilth is cultivated land, land that's been plowed, sowed, and tilled, and yes, till and tilth have the same root. In the text, that land is paired with many orchards, so the land here yields both grain and fruit. Then we get the homesteads. An oast is a kiln used for drying hops, so there's plenty of beer in Minas Tirith, and a garner is a storehouse for agricultural products, like a granary. And yes, they have the same origin as well, the Latin granaria. So those first two have to do with the produce of the land, hops and other grains, while the last two have to do with the animals. A fold is a livestock enclosure, typically for sheep, while a byre is a cowshed. So you can have a cheeseburger and a beer while wearing clothes made of wool, all from this rich area of land protected by the Rammas. Now, after describing the land, we also read that the herdsmen and husbandmen that dwelt there were not many. Herdsmen I don't need to explain. Those are the ones taking care of the sheep and cattle that shelter in the folds and byres. Husbandman is an archaic use of the word husband and is used here to describe the farmers. In the Middle Ages, a husbandman was a small landowner beneath the rank of a yeoman. So not a lot of the farmers and animal caretakers lived in the Pelennor, but enough that there were, of course, households, right? Homesteads, just not very many. Instead, most of them lived within the protection of the walls of Minas Tirith itself, or, as the text says, in mountain valleys in Lusarnach, or even further south in Lebanon. And all I hear when I say that is more Middle-earth Map Monday places to visit. Later, after Beregond has shown Pippin around the place, he gets a view from the top of the city, and we read that Pippin could see all the Pelennor laid out before him, dotted into the distance with farmsteads and little walls, barns and byres, but nowhere could he see any kine or other beasts, kine being an archaic plural noun for cows or cattle. And that's because everybody was leaving in preparation for the coming war. Many roads and tracks crossed the green fields, and there was much coming and going, wains moving in lines towards the Great Gate and others passing out. They were heading south, Beregond explained, to Lusarnach and on to Lebanon. Now, before the Great Assault, Denethor, steward of Gondor, determined that he would not yield the river and the Pelennor unfought, and Faramir made a valiant but ultimately futile defense. But these lands also provided defense in depth, enabling an ordered retreat for most of his men so they could get back to the city and prepare for that attack. Now the homes were burned, the fields overrun, trenches carved and filled with fire as the Witch King's forces approached the besieged city. And that's when the fields became the location of what Appendix A calls the greatest battle of the age. Now, later, after the destruction of the ring on March 25th, we read that when the month of May was drawing near, so about a month after that, the captains of the West set out again. The day after, they came to the green fields of the Pelennor and saw again the white towers under Talm and Dolwyn. Fields had already begun to recover, it seems. About a week later, on May 8th, we read that all the road was lined with people to do them honor and praise them, from the gate of the city to the walls of the Pelennor. The them, in this case, being the riders of Rohan and the sons of Elrond, as the hobbits, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, and Aragorn all stayed in the city. Well, folks, we are out of time for today, so we'll get to the gates and the city of Minas Tirith itself next week. For now, though, folks, that wraps it up for Middle-earth Map Monday. Eventually, maybe, probably, I'll go back to Mailbag Mondays. So if you have any questions for me, email them to barlaman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Be sure to let Barlaman know that your question is for today's Tolkien Times. A big thank you to each of you supporting the TTT on Patreon. I rely on your support to give me the ability to invest my time and resources into researching, writing, and recording these episodes. If you're not a part of this yet, please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times. You can join the TTT Content Council, get a bonus episode every week, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we spend more time in the revised letters on Tolkien Tuesday. Podcast listeners, please subscribe to the show in your podcast apps. For those on YouTube, subscribe to the channel to get all of the PPP productions. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.